I'm going to start with a land acknowledgement. This is one that we do in the city of Hamilton and at HIPSI and the Hamilton Immigration Partnership Council. We often personalize our land acknowledgements as well. But the city of Hamilton is situated on the traditional territories of the Erie, Neutral, Huron-Wendat, Haudenosaunee, and Mississaugas. This land is covered by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, which was an agreement between the Haudenosaunee and the Anishinaabe to share and care for the resources around the Great Lakes. We further acknowledge that this land is covered by the Between the Lakes Purchase 1792 between the Crown and the Mississaugas of the First Credit Nation, the Credit First Nation. Today, the city of Hamilton is home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we recognize we must do more to learn about the rich history of this land so that we can better understand our roles as residents, neighbors, partners, and caretakers. Welcome today to this really exciting event and conversation with our new friend, Elamin Abdelmahmoud, and 3 local individuals who I'll be introducing to you in just a few minutes. So I want to start by just sharing a little bit about what HIPSI is, the Hamilton Immigration Partnership Council. We are a community table. We meet regularly as a council and in various committees to help make sure that newcomers to our city have a positive settlement experience. And we also work to ensure that they feel a sense of belonging. We're funded by Immigration, Refugees, and Citizenship Canada and housed within the city of Hamilton. And you can see some of our member organizations here in this slide. We work in 3 strategic areas, and 2 of which are addressed in today's session. That is social inclusion, which is we want Hamiltonians to understand the benefits of immigration and to take steps in support. And also community engagement, that newcomers have an increased sense of belonging, and we want newcomers to be able to advocate for themselves and to find services and supports that they need to navigate and to engage. So this event today is very exciting because it fits in with a lot of what we stand for as HIPSI. And we're showcasing a number of local people as well as our new friend Elamin, who has a more of a national and maybe even an international profile. So I'm going to start with by asking him a few questions in a kind of interview style format, and then he's going to take over the chair duties. He is a professional podcaster after all, and engaged with three dynamic young women who have their own stories of finding belonging and building community. So there'll be a bit of discussion among the speakers and then opportunity for question and answer from the audience. Before we get the conversation underway, we want to give away some copies of Elamin's book. Of course, we encourage you to go out and to buy it from your local bookstore, but we have secured some copies for high school students here in Hamilton, and we have 4 copies that we'd like to give away as part of today's event. So we're going to start with the first draw there. Hassan, who is our summer student here at HIPSI, has arranged a way for us to do a random draw. Okay.
Okay, can everyone see the screen? Perfect. Okay. Just double checking that there are 43 participants last time I checked. Has that number changed since?
44.
44. Okay, hopefully it doesn't land on one of us. In which case, I guess we can do it again. Generate 18. Does anyone want to look at the participant list?
So I'll go down one. Okay, for this, I've got Habab Hamour. Are you present here? You're obviously present here because you're listed as a participant. So we'd like to give you a copy of this book, Son of Elsewhere. You can you just write your information in a private message to me or to Hassan, or you can send an email to immigration.partnership@hamilton.ca, and we'll make sure that you can pick up a copy of the book. If you have any
Awesome.
questions, just stay on afterwards. Great, congratulations, we have a winner.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay. So my next task is to introduce the today's speakers. Elamin Abdelmahmoud is the host of CBC's weekly pop culture podcast, Pop Chat, and co-host of CBC's political podcast, Party Lines, and a frequent culture commentator for CBC News. He's also a culture writer for BuzzFeed News, where he writes Incoming, the daily morning newsletter, and his work has appeared in Globe and Mail, Maclean's, and Rolling Stone, and his memoir, Son of Elsewhere, was released last week. So welcome, Elamin.
Hi, how's it going?
Annabelle Ragsag is a community innovator and a social policy researcher. She was born and raised in the Philippines. She worked in international development and policy in Australia, Egypt, Germany, and Indonesia before moving to Canada. She is a co-founder of Filipinas of Hamont, which we will hear about today, I'm guessing, and co-convened the Hamilton Asian Alliance to build capacities of celebration and change. She's currently working on a PhD in social work at McMaster University and a data science certificate program at Guelph University. She has no spare time, obviously. Annabelle is also a member of HIPSI. So welcome, Annabelle. And next we have Nora Afifi, who is also a member of HIPSI and was born and raised in Cairo until arriving to Canada when she was in middle school. Nora says, I lived most of my life in Mississauga, where I was deeply in the closet about my orientation. This was one of the reasons I came to Hamilton. I have a lot of love for community and chosen family. For some time, they were the only family that I had. Community has taught me a lot about myself and the world, and I hope to share this back through the work that she does at the YWCA of Hamilton, where she works with 2S LGBTQIA+ newcomer program, Join and Spectrum, and in the wider community. Welcome, Nora. We're happy that you could join us. And last but not least, we'll be hearing from Taliba Howard. Taliba is originally from Jamaica. She has a bachelor's degree from Mary Baldwin University in Virginia, where she studied psychology and sociology. And she spent time in the United States as a non-citizen immigrant. And she's a Canadian citizen, but only started to live here 1 year ago. So her experience has mirrored her newcomer experience in the US, and she's had to find space of comfort. So being such a newcomer to Hamilton, she's already on the staff of the Afro-Canadian Caribbean Association, where she works in the presence of folks that she's glad, who she says, can share my experiences and where I can help young people grow into their full potential. So this is a really exciting group of people that we have assembled today, and a wonderful audience as well. And we're very, very happy. So I'm going to start just with Elamin, and then the other three will join in after a little bit. So we'll unspotlight you all. Okay. So welcome, Elamin, and congratulations on the release of your memoir last week. It must be pretty exciting.
Thank you. It's been a joyous time. Thanks for having me here. It's been an exciting week. It's been an unbelievable week just in terms of the way that the book has been received. I've just been so grateful for that.
What are some of the highlights that you could share?
You know, honestly, the live events have just been an amazing time. We had a launch in Toronto last week. This week I'm in Vancouver. I was in Vancouver yesterday, 2 days ago. And now I'm in Calgary, and just sort of getting a chance to talk to folks about the book, getting a chance to hear from people about the ways that, it resonated with them. And that to me has been like probably the most gratifying part of the job, is just listening to other people's stories and the ways that it ends up connecting with mine. It's not something that I take for granted. I think it's really easy to sort of forget that we have to mine for the ways that we're connected to one another. And so I've been really grateful for the book for, giving people a chance to share those stories.
Yeah, well, we wish you could be here in person in Hamilton with us, but given that your schedule this week, that you're in Calgary right now, we're grateful for the miracles of Zoom and to be able to bring so many people together. We look forward to having some in-person events in the near future, and hopefully you can attend one.
For sure.
So you've now spent, speaking of Hamilton, you've now spent most of your life in Canada, well, Southern Ontario, which is a piece of Canada. And you even have some Hamilton connections. Can you share those connections, what those connections are with us?
Of course. So I'm married to a Hamiltonian. I'm married to a proud Hamiltonian. I spend a lot of time in Hamilton. I think I'm probably in Hamilton at least once a month. And that's whether it's visiting my in-laws or relatively recently, probably like in the last 5 years ago or so. My mom also moved to Hamilton. And so I have been, it's between visiting my parents and visiting my in-laws. I come to Hamilton all the time, and I love Hamilton. I've had a chance to get to know Hamilton a little bit better through those visits, through those frequent visits. And you know what? I've been in love with the town, for a long time.
Great. Well, we do look forward to seeing you here in person sometime.
Yeah.
That would be wonderful. So the title of your memoir is called Son of Elsewhere. Like, what does this term refer to? And like, what is, why is it the title? Why do you choose this as the title? Is there something specific that happened that caused you to focus on this, or?
I would say so. Yeah, I think I wanted to zero in on this idea of, where really is home? Where do I really sort of feel my belonging orients towards? And when I started thinking about that, I started thinking about the fact that I came to Canada when I was 12. I came to this country when I was 12, and I came to a town called Kingston, Ontario. It's a couple hours east of Toronto. And I lived in Kingston for 11 years before moving to Toronto. But my story in Kingston was a story of trying to figure out, where I belonged. And part of that process was at the time feeling like I needed to put away some of my identities, put away some of my identities. So that is like, whether that is like Blackness, this idea of being an immigrant, this idea of being Muslim, because I felt a lot of pressure, to be honest. I felt a lot of pressure just in terms of trying to belong with the people around me. And I was like, I don't want to be a burden. And I put away those identities. And then many years later, I thought, you know what, I want to return to them. I want to return to figure out, like, how do I think of myself as a Black person in Canada? This is something that I haven't spent enough time thinking about. Same thing with being a Muslim in Canada. Same thing with being an immigrant in Canada. And that's how this book was born. This idea of elsewhere is this idea of being kind of suspended somewhere in the middle, because I've been in this country for 22 years. It's, for all intents and purposes, it is home. But there's always a part of me that is like, I'm very aware that there's a part of me that doesn't fully belong here. I sort of start to think about the place I was born, the place where I have so much family. And when I start to think about that, I start to think, well, how much do I owe this homeland versus how much do I owe that other homeland? And I sort of settled on this idea of this elsewhere, this place that's kind of in the middle. It's neither there nor here. It's neither fully there nor fully here. And I wanted to, instead of saying, oh, I'm bouncing back and forth, I wanted to own this place in the middle. I wanted to sort of give it parameters that I could understand, parameters that kind of define it. And that's how this idea of elsewhere was born.
So that's really interesting. The elsewhere is not referring to your home country. It's referring to kind of that in-betweenness, like the fact that you're in two places or belong, part of two places at the same time.
Yeah, exactly that. It's sort of, feeling like it's okay to claim the spaces in the middle, and it's okay to claim both at the same time. That's kind of part of it.
Yeah, I'm sure a lot of people who are joining us today, they could have those experiences as well of hybridity or inhabiting multiple spaces. Is there like a particular passage in the book that really speaks to you, or that even that would you like to read something to us that might capture the essence of that idea or
I'd love to.
experience?
Yeah, I'd love to read just like maybe just the opening epilogue of the book. So this is just like this is where we begin. Um, it's just sort of the prologue of the book. So I'll read a page and a half. This is how the book begins. I am a student of migration stories. I am pulled toward accounts of lives rearranged by the journey from one place to another. If you tell me you are an immigrant or a child of immigrants, we are going to spend some time together because I'll want to hear of the ways that you've had to stretch yourself to find your footing. Your story might include yearning for a home you haven't seen in some time, if ever. It might also feature the hard work of adjusting to new expectations. But neither the yearning nor the adjusting are the point. Instead, I'm interested in the constant calculus of how much of yourself to allot to each homeland and how you navigate the anguish that comes with giving one of them less. This is elsewhere. Elsewhere is a sharp contrast between the here and the there. Elsewhere is when you're compelled to note the differences in weather and temperament and attitude and air between a once home and a now home, just because you walked past burning incense that reminded you of another world. Elsewhere is not a vast land, but rather a sharp edge you inhabit. Its identity as volcano. Elsewhere is the hot, frothing outcome of two tectonic plates constantly crashing into each other. There is violence in this, two lands trying to outdo one another, but in the fissure there is also order. Yeah, there are earthquakes and tremors, but frequently there is brief truce, fragile compromise. When neither is raging for attention, you might find yourself teetering but steady. Perhaps you even recognize the patterns of your sway. Perhaps you pitch a tent in the dislocation. Perhaps you begin to recognize, then eventually categorize what triggers feelings of insufficiency. Perhaps you take Hindi classes at night, or have a tattoo of a word you can't say in a language you don't speak. Elsewhere is an orientation, an emotional frequency, a chaotic compass that waits until you take a step in one direction, then immediately points in the direction behind you. That's where we begin the book.
That's really awesome. Thanks for reading that. I think it's a interesting idea about a person being divided and experiencing a yearning, but also that how you're divided may change over time. Like maybe you never overcome that division, but you feel more in one place at one time and more in another place at another time. So
yeah, and you become familiar with the sort of going back and forth, and that becomes, your sort of your natural state, if you will. Yeah.
So when you were younger, you wrote in the book about going by the name of Stan, and then you're reclaiming of your first name, Elamin. Could you share a little bit about that and how that relate? Because I think that's a really important piece of your journey.
Of course. The story with Stan was like this silly story. That's how it began. I was a part of like the stage crew during a high school talent show, and one of the talents that were going to go on stage was this band where the drummer is also the singer for this band, and he wanted the microphone set up on the left side of his drum set, but I accidentally set it up on the right side of his drum set. And he got up and he had to adjust the microphone in front of everyone. And he said, he said to the audience, sorry, but Stan, the microphone man, put the microphone in the wrong place. That's sort of how it began. And then Stan, the microphone man, stuck, but he partly stuck because I wanted it to, right? Like I sort of was like, well, this is going to be easier for people than my first name. And so I will just use this as an out. And from there on, I began for some time, probably like 4 years or so, introducing myself as Stan. That's a long time. It's a long time to sort of, erase your own name to make it easier on other people. It took me some time to recognize that that's what I was doing. It wasn't probably until second, maybe third year university that I started saying, no, you know what? I like my first name. I want people to use that. There are still people in my life who struggle with having been introduced to me, I introduced myself as Stan. Who are like, oh, I have to correct myself and I have to like stop using Stan. And I don't blame them because they use that name for years. But that's basically the story.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, there are, did you find that there are, there's pros and cons of using Stan and Elamin? Like, I know that we know that there's research out there that shows when people are applying for jobs, for example, that when they use foreign sounding names, they're less likely to get a callback for an interview, or there are assumptions that come with those names. But your reclaiming of your name obviously has benefits as well. So it was a decision that you made.
I think at the time it was beneficial for me to go by Stan. It really was just easier. It made a lot of conversations way easier. I didn't have to sort of repeat my name a bunch of times. It just kind of, it shortened the time that other people had to think about my foreignness, if that makes sense. And that was at the time for me really useful. Like, and I don't want to, I look back at that period of time and I cringe, but I also have a bit of empathy for that version of myself, because I think that's what I needed then. I don't need that now, but I have no, I'm not angry with my former self for needing that.
Yeah, well, that search for belonging is something that everyone experiences, especially, seems especially acute during adolescence. It's not limited to people who are new to a country or come from elsewhere, but at the same time, I think there's added layers to it when you are speaking a second language and have parents who grew up in a different culture. So could you talk a little bit about where you found some places where you experienced belonging after you moved to Canada, or isolation, but belonging is more of our theme? Yeah.
I would say that the place where I really belonged was the mosque. Like the local Kingston Mosque was like the first place where I was like, well, even if we're like, some of us are first generation immigrants, some of us are second, third generation immigrants, but all of us have this degree at the mosque of being like, oh yeah, we're all sort of not from here. So like there's just a bunch of things that we already can sort of agree on in that way. We sort of see each other eye to eye on that front. That made things easier. So the mosque for me was a refuge because I didn't have to explain myself. By contrast, I think like the first couple of years in school were isolating. They're isolating not because people were mean in any kind of way. For the most part, they weren't. They were just isolating because there's like these constant attempts to communicate, communicate everything that you have going on inside of you, communicate everything that's going on in your head, going on in your heart. But I didn't have the language to do it. I didn't have the confidence to do it. All those things, they become their own kind of prison, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Thanks. I was mentioning at the beginning that at HIPSI, we want newcomers to feel knowledgeable about kind of services and supports that are there for them, that they can access. We want people to know about their rights and to feel confident about their place in community. So sometimes we have referred to this as active citizenship. Like, what does that term active citizenship mean to you, and how does that connect to belonging? Like, is one required for the other, like citizenship and belonging, or what are your thoughts about that? It's not really something that's in the book too much around citizenship. But, I know that you have some thoughts on this.
Yeah, I do think a lot about citizenship and belonging, because for me, like I sort of watched my dad as he forged those connections around him in Kingston, and this was of course a new land for me, but he arrived a couple of years before we did. And so when I hear the term active citizenship, I sort of think about what it means to make other people's problems your problems. That's sort of the easiest way to think about it. The easiest way to think about it for me is to think about seeing somebody else's problem and saying, I can help with that. And the way that I can help with that will be significant and meaningful. and I'll be able to make that person's problem my problem and then fix it. And in doing so, you sort of create a space where you are one with another person because you're both tackling the same problem that's in front of you. And in doing so, you show them that they belong, and in doing so, you belong too. I think it takes, it's a muscle that you have to exercise. It's not, it doesn't always come naturally for a lot of people to look around and say, hey, I think I know a thing or two about the thing that you're going through. And I may not be able to resolve the whole thing, but here's a little bit that I can contribute. And in many ways, I sort of look around me and think about, okay, what are the problems that other people are having that I'm willing to make my own? I'm willing to say, I want to take this on with you. I think that's active citizenship.
So what you're describing seems very individual, like individuals helping each other out. It could be that way, or, maybe that's how it is for you.
But I think what I mean by that is that, like, if we suddenly are all making each other's problems our problems, you automatically find yourself in community, right? Like you sort of automatically find yourself in a collective of people, sort of all coming in and trying to say, like, this is for all of us to deal with. And this can be on that individual level, or this can be in a way of, so I see this all the time, for example, with when there was an influx of refugees in 2015, 2016, I remember my dad sort of deciding that he was going to make driving around the new arrivals as they sort of gather the things that they need around town, just volunteering his car because that's the only thing that he can offer. Like, to me, like, that automatically put him in community with the other people who are helping in different ways. And before you know it, you sort of have a thriving community that's just based around the act of helping, the act of solving a problem together.
Yeah, that's really lovely. It's something that we are facing now and having a lot of discussions about with the arrival and expected more arrivals of people from Afghanistan and Ukraine in 2022. There are a lot of people who want to help, and how do we connect those people who want to help with ways that they can find fulfillment? So we do have some young people with us today, and time is marching on, so I'm running out of time to keep asking you questions in this conversation, but just wondering if you have some advice for young people and older people who are trying to be more active in their communities.
I think the biggest lesson I've learned, and it sounds simple, but I don't think it is taking the time to find your people. And by your people, I mean the people who make you feel empowered, make you feel capable, make you feel like you're able to confront a certain issue. And for me, like, I've certainly been around people who did not make me feel that way. And you feel kind of helpless, right? Like, you feel powerless in certain situations. So being around your people, aka people who will be there for you and with you, but also who help you think about yourself in a different way, that's something that takes time. Be patient with yourself as you try to find your people, but I think, like, everything becomes so much easier when you find the people that you need in your life, and you figure out how you can help them too, how you can be in community with them. It takes time, but I think it's also a really joyous process.
Yeah, that's great. I really love that. Finding your people, it's where you feel comfortable, but also can feel challenged to do more. And then my last question for you, just the one-on-one is, you're talking about belonging and feeling lack of belonging sometimes. We've all been there in different ways and to different extents. But what suggestions would you have for people who may be joining us today, who may be newcomers, but they may be old comers or Canadian born or whatever, to feel that they belong, and for helping, what suggestions do you have for people who are interested in helping others to create a sense of belonging? Like, how can we act to help create a belonging in our community?
I think thinking about your space and thinking about the rhythms of your daily life, something, at least for me, that's something that I've been reflecting around a lot in the pandemic, is like, how much of my daily life revolves around or has to interact with other people's problems, as we were talking about, other people's struggles as they're going through. And I think I realized pretty early on in the pandemic that I am pretty isolated from those struggles, but that doesn't mean they don't exist. And sometimes it takes sort of seeking them out, reaching out to friends, reaching out to people around you who you know are connected to community and saying, hey, I noticed you are really involved in X, Y, and Z. What do you do there and how can I help too? It takes a lot of initiative, but that's citizenship, right? Like citizenship is something that kind of comes to you in a sense, and then you have to at a certain point meet it halfway and decide that you're going to be sort of an active participant. I think I grew up in a context that allowed me to understand that citizenship is very much about taking action and not just sort of receiving. And so I would say taking initiative and figuring out where that initiative for you comes from. Usually it's like there's one person in your life that you know who's like very deeply involved in the local community. And if you ask them, they will give you like 25 suggestions on how you too can get involved. Find that person, and I know they're going to be like inexhaustible with their energy, and give them a minute to explain to you all the ways that you too can help, and then join them there. I think you'll find a lot of fulfillment.
Yeah, that's great. So find role models and people who can be good examples for you, and also step out of your shelter. Like this, you make a decision not to be sheltered if you are sheltered, to increase your own awareness. So I think the three women I've introduced earlier will have a lot to say and share on these topics. So I'm going to bring them in to the conversation. We're going to ask them to join us here in the spotlight, and I'm actually going to exit the spotlight and let the professional podcaster here take over with the discussion. And
well, thanks, Sarah.
Yeah, so you'll see me back on at the end when we're going to do a few more giveaways of the book and open it up for question and answer from the audience. So I've got Annabelle joining us and Taliba, and then and there's Nora. And so I'm heading out, and I'll be watching. Thanks.
Amazing. Thank you. Well, I'm thrilled to be talking to you guys. I'm so excited to hear about your stories. Annabelle, maybe I'll start with you and Filipinas of Hammond. What was the motivation in terms of you starting the movement?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Elamin. So for me, as a mother of a young child, I struggled looking for resources to help my kid have a meaningful understanding of their mixed heritage. And I thought how interesting it would be for me to curate resources for them. And then I realized maybe there are other parents who are also interested in having resources for their kids. And then I met a young woman who's also of Filipino heritage in the Reaching for Power series by the YWCA. And her name is Jessica Vinluan. And she said that growing up here in Hamilton, she felt out of place in white spaces, but also she felt out of place in community gatherings. So she thought that there should be like a different house where the values and experiences that she has as a second generation Filipina Canadian could be fostered without rejecting any. Like also similar, I think, to what you're sharing elsewhere earlier about being a son of elsewhere, like finding that spot where all of your all the values and identities that you have is found in a place or in a space and time.
I love that. I think that's a beautiful answer. Nora, is it Nora or Nura, by the way? I should ask.
It's the second one.
Nura, amazing. Okay, I wanted to ask about this idea of chosen family. Let's talk about that a little bit, about embracing an idea of chosen family, and then B, wanting to cultivate it yourself. How did you make that journey?
Oh God. That question like hits my heart a lot because honestly, like there's just so many like pieces of my life where chosen family was like the foundation of like my social life, my existence.
Yeah.
So yeah, thank you for asking that. I think the way I came to cultivate it was honestly when I first came to Canada. Like when I first came to Canada, it was just me, my immediate family, and some other, like a very small family unit of relatives. Um, but our neighborhood, our community members, whether they are from the same cultural background or not, soon became our family, where, you know, like a random time someone just knocks on your door and comes in, and that like in itself just made me feel so much more at home and so much less alienated than when I initially felt how, like when I first arrived in Canada, because that sense of vibrant community of people being close knit was not there. um, and then in coming into like my journey of like coming, I guess, into or out to myself, um, and like living in the closet for a really long period of time, and as it is with a lot of queer and trans folks, like your community members kind of become closer to you than your family. And we're often all at risk of losing family members if we're not out yet and we don't know how things are about to, you know, unfold if that were to happen, or if we chose to make that happen. So like the chosen family is literally kind of your rock. Like they are the people that you have no matter what, and it doesn't matter about blood or no blood. They're kind of just, you know, I mean, you can't live without them, just like you can't live without, you know, your mother or your father.
Yeah, that's a beautiful answer. Thank you. Taliba, let's talk about returning to Canada and your relationship to that, because you've been around for a year. Is that the story?
Yep.
So you, and then but you sort of immediately sought out to develop like community, get involved with sort of trying to cultivate community. So you're clearly sort of community minded. Has that always been the case for you?
Right. Yeah. So I think I kind of will start out my answer in the same way that I guess the trend of the conversation has been going. A lot of the time, as you know, immigrants, most of our home countries come from a more community valued sense of identity, rather than here where most of the identity are individualistic. So a lot of it was due to the fact that, you know, it's a little bit harder in comparison to the United States, where the Black identity is more so unified within being either African American or just being Black. Whereas here, there are a lot of different facets of the Black community depending on ethnicity. Even though it is unified, you know, there are a lot of things which unify us. I had to find out really quickly that there are different ways in which it presents itself. So yeah, that's one of the things that has lent its hand to why it has been so important to me to get involved with my community, as well as to do work to ensure that, you know, folks in the generations after me, and even, you know, seniors, feel like they belong in spaces as well.
Annabelle, I want to pick up on that thread because I think that's an interesting one. The idea that we all sort of come from more communitarian values, places with more communitarian values, and existing in maybe in a country that doesn't have as robust a tradition of that. And so we sort of have to cultivate our own communities and remind ourselves of the ways that we get together when we, you know, where we came from, and try to sort of rebuild that here. How have you found that? Have you found the response to Filipinos of Hamont, or just in general, trying to create that community?
Yeah, it's a lot of over overwhelming and grateful emotions coming from me and Jessica when we, you know, when we initially started the Filipinas of Hamont. We the idea that we had, that we thought that maybe someone will also resonate with this, but we weren't sure. But
Right.
when we rolled out a couple of our, we had like a history and art programming last year, which was funded by the Hamilton Community Foundation. When we rolled that out, a lot of parents told us that it resonated with them as well. A
Mm.
lot of younger Filipinx Canadians gave their comments, mails, emails in our social media. They said that we want something that also tailored for not for kids, but for those who want to hear about this history.
Mhm.
Because I think there are no institutional resources around, even if Filipinos have been here since the 1960s.
Mhm.
Like in the United States, where there are ethnic studies.
Mhm.
In Canadian institutions, there's not a lot of that. There's none. And then, I think there's this innate need for all of us to know our past in order to move forward.
Yeah.
So I think that struck a chord.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Noor, I want to ask about the safety aspect, if you will, of the community work that you do. And by that I mean, like, I think he would have been a bit more emotionally unsafe, if you will, to sort of begin the work of cultivating community, of saying like, look, I'm out, and I also want to talk about being out, and I want to talk about what, while acknowledging my background. And it's a little bit harder maybe to find your people in that way. So how did it feel for you to sort of emotionally approach doing this work?
I feel like I have to think on that. So you're asking about the emotional safety of kind of taking up space and I guess being very open about my identity while navigating work.
Yeah.
Okay. I feel like that actually has not been as hard as I expected it to.
Oh, that's the best news. Okay, continue. Yes.
So that was the awesome part. I feel like, so I grew up I grew up in Cairo and then Mississauga. Had I done that in Mississauga, it definitely would have been a very emotionally unsafe situation, just
Okay.
because of like family ties and relationships there, and perhaps friends who didn't know that about me, and how that would unfold. But the beautiful thing about going through that process in a new city, and in a city like Hamilton with honestly such a rich queer history, has made it very easy. The hard part in navigating it was actually around race. So queerness was like the potentially like contentious issue in non-queer spaces,
Mhm.
whether BIPOC spaces, community organizing spaces, neighborhoods. But in queer spaces here, I really felt race was the emotionally unsafe situation, just because I mean, I'm just surrounded, like in Mississauga, I was surrounded by QT BIPOC. And here, there were no QT BIPOC spaces when I first arrived. Um, so yeah, that was the safety navigation issue. I've come to a point where I'm independent enough and well supported enough where like things around my personal emotional safety around queerness
Mhm.
are a lot easier to handle, because at the end of the day, even if something does get to me, I have a friend I can call and just rant to, and we're good to go.
Yeah.
Or I can just, I guess collectively work with my community to take action about that. So
Yeah.
yeah, that emotional safety aspect around queerness has actually been going pretty well.
Amazing. That's so beautiful to hear.
Yeah.
Let's do a round on what the city has done for you. And maybe we'll begin with Taliba. Taliba, let's talk about how Hamilton, how did you come to live in Hamilton?
So it's actually pretty interesting. I came to Canada in general because of immigration issues in the States.
Mhm.
As you may or may not know, immigration is a whole different beast down there. But
Yeah.
so I came here and I was actually balancing my time between Toronto and Hamilton. And eventually I found a more safe and tight-knit community here in Hamilton through ACA, actually. And I kind of want to pick up on where we just left off with Nora. And she was describing how it feels more emotionally safe to be validated in some sense within our racial identities, within any other intersection, because I also am a part of the community, and I found that before anything, it was always most important for me to feel safe within my racial identity before I was able to feel safe with anything else. And I think that in Hamilton, I have been able to find a way to do that. As a queer person and as a woman, I feel like I have always felt like I can be more comfortable with those parts of my identity when my race is validated. So like in spaces like ACA, where not only am I doing the work, but I'm also surrounded by people who have similar backgrounds as me, it's easier and more natural for me to just be myself.
Right.
You know what I mean? So, and then on top of that, I think that Hamilton is such an eccentric place, and it's such a diverse place in ways that people wouldn't even understand, that it's a really nice place to kind of grow and get to know myself. So yeah, that's been a great part of living here, is that I get to be around people who not only look like me, but who also have similar experiences as me, as me, in a smaller setting in comparison to a place like Toronto.
That's
So I think that in a sense, because it's such a small area, we have to fight just a little bit harder to not only be seen and heard, but to also have our missions and our goals reached in the ways that we'd like to have them, presented.
the best part of that answer is watching Nura go, yes, yes. Like she's muted, but you can just hear the go, like, yeah, it's great. Let's talk about you, Nura. How did you find your way to Hamilton?
So I found my way to Hamilton essentially in kind of a really bad place in my life. And I just had to move out and find safety. But Mississauga was no longer affordable or possible for me to live in. So Hamilton was the option. It kind of just happened by chance. Like it was going to be Hamilton, Toronto, some other city. And I'm really glad that I did end up here, because after about 4 years of living here, I'm like, I don't see myself living anywhere else. So that's kind of how I ended up here. I first moved to Westdale, where I actually started feeling like, wow, I really do feel like a racial minority. And just walking down the streets, like I was like, wow, like I haven't felt this way since I first moved to Canada. But moving into downtown in the Beasley neighborhood has really changed that for me. So I think that's part of the reason why Hamilton just really feels like home now.
And what about you, Annabelle? How did you find your way to Hamilton?
So before Hamilton, my husband and I lived in Halifax and Ottawa. But because of his, a decade ago, because of his postdoc at McMaster, we moved here. And the interesting thing is, I was introduced, my introduction to Hamilton is sort of through the Bangladeshi community, because my husband is of Bangladeshi descent. So they sort of, because they thought that, like they sort of adopted me even until now, like the Bangladeshi community, Bangladeshi friends give me food, give us food, pack things for us, even on holidays and festivals that we are not celebrating, that I'm not celebrating. So it's just interesting to see that sort of another community as well who's reaching out to me and sort of brought me around, sort of like oriented me to places around Hamilton. But yeah, that's the short story. So it's a story of my daughter is born in McMaster Hospital. So we're sort of like a like a McMaster oriented in the beginning.
Mhm. I'm conscious of how much I'm running out of time. So let me just do this last question. I'll do for every one of you, but maybe we'll start with Annabelle. It's a question about civic engagement and civic engagement for newcomers. The question is, how do our personal journeys, do you think, how do you think those personal journeys affect how we participate and show up in our own communities?
That's a very good question, but two things. One is, I think there's a lot of the things we are doing, like even with Taliba and Noura, and even with your book, Elamin, it has a continuity with our personal histories. The way we show up in the community is based on our lived experiences and the things we want to do to participate in shaping the history, in shaping the future. Sorry, I keep on saying history. The way we do things to shape the future that we envision them to be. And then second, we also have to recognize, I think, that a lot of newcomers are just very busy. Not because they have, not the usual busyness that we know. A lot of newcomers have to, apart from starting from scratch, like when Sarah introduced me as having this career outside of Canada, when I came here, it was a reality, like I had a reality that they didn't mean anything in Canada. Whatever you did elsewhere,
Wow.
like it doesn't mean anything. You have to start from zero. So you have that busyness that ties you down. Like you suddenly realize, oh, the things that I have done, they're couched in the words of internationally trained. It means it doesn't mean anything.
Mm.
No one understands what it is.
Mm.
So that the need to navigate, the need to start from scratch, and a lot of newcomers have 2 jobs, 3 jobs, 4 jobs. It's really difficult to carve out time to be active in the community.
Right.
Yeah.
Taliba?
Yeah, I really agree with what Annabelle was saying in the sense of understanding where a lot of people are coming from and where their safety net needs to be, as far as, within every family unit, within every unit as a provider for members of your immediate family. It's important to have that financial safety net, but at the, I guess, top portion of where that personal familial safety is, you really need to have a sense of community.
Mm-hmm.
So understanding and having that experience as someone who had to kind of build and come into their own community, I really understand that it's one thing to feel like, okay, now I'm safe because I have a roof over my head, but another thing to feel like I now have people who I can talk to.
Mm-hmm.
I now have people who I can reach out to and depend on. I now know that there are these organizations where I can, trust to leave my kids, or these organizations where I may or may not be able to find some friends. So having that personal experience kind of has helped me in how I, help to develop programs, how I start my own programs, how I reach out to people, and how I try, and how we as an organization try to meet people where they are, stay consistent people, develop things so people can really feel like not only are they a part of our community, but
Mm-hmm.
they have a sense to be able to grow while they're here,
Mm-hmm.
and that they do belong here as well.
Mm-hmm. I love that answer. Noura, last word to you.
Yeah, I'm kind of in between. So I fully see like survival and being in survival mode as definitely being a huge barrier to how we show up in community.
Mm-hmm.
But also, like, this is where, I guess the two sides of contradictions come together. Is I find often that community being a solution to survival, because one thing that I cannot, like, I can write a whole book about this, is how queer newcomers show up for each other in terms of mutual aid and survival. Like, Oh my God, it is absolutely beautiful. So it's kind of like this weird contradiction where folks I see who are struggling with survival and see that as a barrier to being involved in community. Others who are struggling with survival are actually surviving because of their involvement in community.
Right.
So it's just a really interesting and beautiful thing. On the other hand, I also do think like our communities need to make space for newcomers to just be able to take up that space, to learn alongside, to, have a voice, to participate, to know what's happening. And that's definitely another barrier, but honestly, like if you struggled with housing, you are likely to show up for someone when they're struggling with housing. If you've struggled with X, Y, and Z, you are likely to show up in that way. So it's just something we kind of need to tap into. And I think these are barriers that we need to hopefully work together to break down because they're just holding us back. And when I see them overcome, it's just like the most beautiful thing, not just for the individual, but for the community as well.
I love these answers. I love these answers so much. I wish we could keep this going forever. But I just want to say thank you to the three of you for really showing up for this conversation. I'm so grateful for that. And now we're going to invite Sarah back in. Oh, you had a
Great.
little heart in Zoom. I didn't know you could do that. That's cute. I'm so excited by it.
This is wonderful. It's a really lovely conversation and interesting. I don't know that it went towards places of safety and safe spaces. And that wasn't something that I had been thinking about, but it really makes a lot of sense. So that's why it's valuable to have these conversations. So we're now going to open it up to questions. And so if you have any comments or questions, feel free to put them into the chat. That's our preferred way of doing that so that a lot of people can get their questions in. And while you're thinking about your questions, we're going to do a few more book giveaways. So I'm going to invite Hassan back into the spotlight with his random number generator. And we're going to do 3 book giveaways right now. We just lost a few people, so that's good. Your chances just increased. So there. We have 44 here now, I think. I know that on the hour, a lot of people have meetings that start, so they just missed their chance. But,
Okay.
Yeah.
So you just do all 3 at the one time?
So I'm gonna, and I'll take the first one, and then Natasha can take the second one, and Araf can take the third one. So the HIPSI team is going to count.
Perfect. Okay, so
Hopefully
the
we don't
first,
get the same number.
first number is 36. Probably best to count from the bottom up for that one.
36. Okay, I'm doing that one. Okay.
37.
No.
I think Natasha is going to take 37.
Sure.
And then Araf number 2. That will likely need to be done again because we are probably number 2. I'm just going to do that one more time. 23 is our last number. Araf, are you okay with doing 23?
Yes.
Okay. I'm not sure what happened to mine. Something weird happened, so I'm gonna have to start over again. I'm 37, right? Okay, people have to stop leaving because it's messing things up. Okay, no, and we have Khadijah coming in. Oh, someone's just arriving. Okay, that's really gonna mess things up. Okay. So 37 is what I had, right? And there I have someone whose name begins with a U. I can't quite see it. For some reason, it's not showing up. Uma, U-M-M-E.
That's Ume.
Ume,
You're right.
Ume, okay. Ume, you're a winner.
Oh, thank you.
So we'll connect with you, or you can connect with immigration.partnership@hamilton.ca. And you can either come to City Hall and pick up your book, or we'll get it to you somehow. And who else do we have? Natasha, do you have a name?
Yes, I think I counted correctly, but it switches. So I'm going to say that it's Tara Janabi is what I see on my screen.
Okay,
So Tara, if you're here, let us know.
great. Bye, Muna. Glad you could join us. Okay, and Araf, have you been able to get somebody?
Yes, so I have Lindsay Rowe,
Okay,
number 23.
all right. So I think Lindsay's one of our teachers joining us.
Yes.
Maybe we could do one more draw. And then I'm waiting for some questions in the chat here, because Lindsay's already going to get a copy with her class.
Okay, let's give it one more shot.
And let's see, are there any questions in the chat? I see a lot of people saying I have to leave. Thank you so much. But I think there's a question. Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say there is one question from earlier on that is it also a distinction from the ideas of somewhere versus the anywhere people? So I think this is directed more towards Elamin and what he was talking about earlier about his book.
Sorry, what was the question? Is there also
Sure.
Okay.
So let me bring it up again. It says, is it also a distinction from the ideas of the somewhere versus the anywhere people, in quotes?
I guess when I think about the idea of, somewhere people, that to me sounds like a place of being rooted, sort of identifying yourself with a very specific place. And what I was trying to write around, or sort of write my way through, was this complication of not feeling your allegiances are always challenged no matter where you are, and then kind of becoming okay with that, becoming okay with this sort of idea of suspension, and owning it, and instead of seeing it as some kind of negative space, seeing it as some kind of space that is entirely undefinable, try to put some emotional parameters around it, trying to sort of wrap my mind around, okay, this is what it means to be suspended. These are all the emotions that come with that. These are all the responsibilities that come with that. And these are the things that you likely encounter in that space. That's kind of sort of the idea that I was trying to deal with.
That's great. So I see one from Nora. I don't know if Nora wants to ask it directly or I can read it out loud.
Yeah.
No.
No, I see it.
It wasn't for me. It was someone else. I was just flagging it.
Oh, yeah. No, there was no specific moment. So the question was there a particular moment where I realized I wanted to reclaim my name? I don't think so. I think there's just sort of over time, the name that doesn't quite belong to you kind of begins to feel off, and you begin to sort of realize that you're selling yourself short, that you're not showing up whole to the world. And so over time, it takes away from you. And I think I just kind of eventually got to a place where I was like, no, I don't need to reduce myself any further than this. Yeah.
Okay, I think for the winner, we have Thayer Trad, number 30, counting down. Again, the numbers do keep changing, but it's a random draw, so it's just as good as anything else. Yeah, so is the Thayer here?
Yes. Yeah, I'm here.
And just get in touch with us, or you can stay on the line when the meeting ends, and we'll make arrangements to get the book to you. Great. So
Okay, thank you so much.
wonderful. You're welcome. Are there any other questions, or anybody want to make any kind of any comments? I know that a lot of people had to pop off because there's this magic hour between 12 and 1, and then people have meetings at 1 sometimes.
Of course.
Yeah. But maybe there's a feeling that everything got covered so brilliantly, and that's good. Okay. how about any of the panelists? Is there anything that you wanted to say that you didn't feel like you wanted to share, or Elamin, any final thoughts?
I just appreciated the brilliance of Annabelle and Felipa and Nura. So thank you for that.
Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you. I really enjoyed being able to have a voice here. And this is the kind of thing that, newcomer communities really need, spaces to be able to speak, as well as to listen to folks who have similar experiences to them, as well, as people who don't have the experience and just want to, be able to see what it is that people go through, what people have been able to overcome. So yeah, this is really important. Thank you so much.
Great. Yeah, we hope that it's helpful both for people who have lived experiences like the ones shared and those who don't, just as you just said, Taliba. So just to reinforce that. And we hope that we can create more spaces like this in the near future. So I really want to thank each of the speakers, Elamin, Annabelle, Taliba, and Nora. The non-Elamin speakers are all also getting a copy of the book. So that's their thanks and gratitude for giving your time and sharing your experiences today. And I want to thank the HIPSI team, Natasha, Araf, and Hassan for contributing to this event today. We really also want to encourage you who are attending today to learn more about HIPSI. You can subscribe to our newsletter. It's not too onerous. It comes out every other week and it's pretty short, but you can follow us on social media on Instagram and Twitter to stay informed. And we hope above all that you will practice citizenship as you are able, that you feel inspired from today's conversation to reach out within your own communities and across communities to help others individually and collectively. I would be remiss if we didn't mention that there's a provincial election next week. So one way that those of you who are Canadian citizens can practice citizenship is by engaging in the franchise and in the vote. And so Araf is putting some links in the chat, including some multilingual resources that are available for people to inform yourselves about issues and the voting process. Because of the timing, we didn't do a lot at HIPSI around the provincial vote, but we hope to do more with the upcoming municipal elections, which will be happening in October. So another way that you can get involved is to get involved in a campaign. Anyone, you don't have to be a citizen to get involved in a campaign. And that's another way that we hope that you'll think about getting involved. And with that, I think that's the end. I've lost all my notes. They're just going everywhere here. And I think that we're finished. So I just want to say thank you. And we hope that you'll reach out to HIPSI and stay engaged with us as well as in your communities in the future. Thank you.
Thanks, folks.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.